Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the Greek armoured cruiser Georgios Averof. Built in 1907 and she was then launched in 1910. She was the last of her kind in terms of being an armoured cruiser. She was built in Orlando shipyards by the Italians. Yes, lifelong enemies of the Greeks, I know. Ironic, isn't it? And it will later come back to haunt their decision. So, how did Greece come to the money to buy such a ship? I mean, after all, they haven't exactly had the best history of money or using it. So, they got lucky, actually, in this case, with Georgios Averof dying recently. Now, he was a rather wealthy man, in fact, technically a billionaire by Greek terms, and he left 8 million golden drachma to the Greek government to buy a new warship with. And so they did. And it was the Georgios Averof, or at least that's not what his name was, but that's what they named it after himself. So she was a Pisa-class armoured cruiser, and she was commissioned in 1911 under the name Georgios Averof. So what were her specifications? Well, her length was 140 metres, her beam 21 metres, and her draft 7.18 metres. She displaced 10,116 metric tonnes, and this is in 1911. Her speed was 24 knots and her range 2,480 nautical miles at 17.5 knots. This is all quite impressive already for an armoured cruiser. Her guns were 4 234mm Armstrong guns, along with 8 190mm guns. She also included the secondary weapons of 16 76mm guns and 4 47mm guns. She also carried 3 430mm single-tube torpedoes. Her armour was 200mm thick on the bout, at its thickest point, and her deck 40mm thick at the thickest point. Following her launching in 1911, she was immediately sent from Italy with a Greek crew under the commander of Ioannis Dominios to England for the coronation of King George V. This already caused tension among the crew, among the crew and officers over the fact that they weren't sent to Greece to train. However, another problem arose. Following the coronation, she was forced into dry docks due to running aground. This again caused more tension. The tension finally boiled over when the crew were served Stilton instead of feta cheese. Now, of course, if you don't realise, Greek people at that point had never really experienced the concept of mouldy cheeses, so they were thinking they were being served mouldy food. This resulted in a mutiny. However, the mutiny was put down without any bloodshed. It resulted in Ioannis Dominios being recalled back to Greece along with the instigators of the riot. It also then resulted in Pavlos Konstantinoutis being made commander. Now, he is a key figure. The First Balkan War then began in 1912, where Averof would play one of the main parts of the conflict. Her main battle, where she essentially astonished everyone, was the Battle of Ely, where Averof left her slow battle group of pre-dreadnought ships and made use of her speed of up to 24 knots to fight off 3 Turkish battleships, 1 Turkish ironclad, 1 protected cruiser, and 4 destroyers. A impressive feat already, just essentially going in to fight them, but she won against them. In the battle, however, she did sustain 2 casualties and 9 wounded, after being hit by 3 Turkish shells. However, none of those shells did penetrate any of the vital areas, and also they were the only casualties the Averof ever faced. It also resulted in the Turkish fleet being forced into port for most of the war. However, in 1913, the Turks again attempted to break through. And again, similar to the Battle of Ely, the Battle of Lemnos, it resulted in the same thing, where the Averof used her speed and manoeuvrability and gun power to essentially fight off the Turks. The Konstantinoutis also made use of a manoeuvre called Crossing the T, which was most famously used during the Battle of Jutland by the British fleet later on. During World War I, however, she did not participate in any conflict. This was due to the fact that Greece was neutral during World War I against the Turks. After all, they had just fought a massive war between them and so didn't want to risk any further conflict. This then, of course, their neutrality changed due to the French pressure, where they then declared war on the Turks in 1917. However, at that point, Turkey was too basically injured in battle, destroyed to fight. So the only part of the war that the Averof actually really played in was essentially sailing into Constantinople to raise the Greek flag. However, between 1925 and 1927, she underwent a refit to modernise her. The problem being was that although it removed her secondary weapons to make way for new anti-aircraft guns, it did not change her engines. And due to now being quite old, her top speed was now reduced to 16 knots. This would further go down. Between these points, she did fight in multiple sort of wars against Turkey through more Balkan wars and Greco-Turkish wars. However, she didn't do anything noteworthy other than assisting troop transports landing on Greek islands, which would now become key islands that you'd see in modern Greece. However, in 1941, Germany finally broke through Greek lines following Italian failures during World War II. Now, the Greek government ordered the ship to be scuttled. This was due to the fact that, one, she was quite old and therefore not of any value to the British Mediterranean fleet or the Free French fleet or any fleet, essentially. And two, she was a pride of the Greek forces. They didn't want her to fall into enemy hands in the first place, so that sort of be humiliation. However, the crew ignored this order. They then basically cut through harbour booms in Athens and sent the ship away. She then arrived in Alexandria, which was at the time under British control and would remain under British control until Egypt became free of British colonial control. Now, following her arrival in Alexandria, she was deemed to be too old to participate in any major events happening in the Mediterranean, most notably going to be Sicily in 1943, but that's 2 years later. So she was sent to the Indian Ocean to protect convoys. Now, there was good reason for this, as the merchant raider Cormorant had recently been basically attacking merchant ships in the area. Now, if you didn't know, the Cormorant was essentially a merchant ship fitted with guns, hence the name Merchant Raider. It was a very dangerous ship and feared basically by the British Navy, rightfully so. However, the Averof was lucky in the sense that the Cormorant had then gone to Australia, where it then met its fateful end along with HMAS Sydney, which is a video for another time. Following her sending to the Indian Ocean, she, however, was still unable to achieve her goals due to the fact that she was now being reduced to 14 knots because the British did not have the right parts to fix her engines properly. Eventually, she was sent to guard the mouth of the Suez Canal, where she would continue that role until 1944, where the exiled Greek government boarded the ship and headed from Egypt back to liberated Athens, where the first ever flag of free Greece was from the Averof, and it was flown on the Parthenon. And then she was decommissioned in 1952. She now remains a museum ship in Piraeus, Athens. However, there is one thing we haven't looked at properly. How was the Averof so successful? After all, she was fighting off entire fleets by her own in her early days. Well, the thing we have to look at is, first of all, she was already obsolete by the time she was launched. The naval arms race was all at its height, but that's comparing it to Western powers, which had dreadnoughts and other far more advanced weaponry. So let's compare her to the Turks, her main enemy. The Turkish had been left out of the arms race essentially due to the fact that they didn't really have any allies at the time. Although in World War I they were allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, at the time Italy was realistically the ally of Germany and Austria, which is again why it's so sort of strange how the Italian Navy sold her to the Greeks, who were more or less allied with the British. However, that was due to budgetary problems. Another thing we have to consider is the Turkish actually wanted to buy the ship. However, they could not get the payments in time, which allowed the Greeks to buy it first. Then, of course, we have the big factor as to why the Averof was so successful against the Turks. The Turks were using outdated ships. As I listed for the Battle of Ely, they were using ironclads, which, if you didn't realise, were common in the 19th century and were practically completely phased out by the 20th century. They were using very old ships and not really anything that was going to be able to compete against the Averof. Essentially, if you look at it this way, it's like taking a late war World War II tank from America, for example, and placing it against a Cold War Centurion, for example. It's just not a fair fight, is it? Although the Averof could have been defeated by the enemy, she had far better speed, far better guns, far better engines, that sort of stuff. She had every advantage possible, and the Turks didn't, which is kind of what resulted in the Averof being so successful in her sort of fight against the Turks. I hope you guys found this sort of video interesting. I want to continue making these sort of random videos about random parts of history. But again, I can't really do the Averof justice in 10 minutes. Also, this is my 4th attempt of recording the video, so hopefully it works. Thank you for watching.